Welcome to Dread Pop Magazine, and this is Movie Bites. I'm your host, Danielle DeVore. Today we're talking about what I consider to be the best adaptation of Richard Matheson's novel, I Am Legend. And that film would be The Omega Man. Now, most people will disagree with me, and in a way, they're right. The Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price, is so far the closest to the novel in terms of an adaptation. But what it doesn't do is capture the feeling of loneliness and desperation of Robert Neville living alone in a world gone mad. The film differs from the novel in several ways. In I Am Legend, the novel, humanity is destroyed by a bacterial plague spread by bats and mosquitoes, which turns the population into vampire-like creatures, whereas in this film version, biological warfare is the cause of the plague that kills most of the population by asphyxiation and turns most of the rest left into nocturnal mutants that suffer from a form of albinism. So what is the Omega Man? The film starring Charlton Heston stuck with me for years as a child. When I first saw it, I was very young, and I didn't know the name of the movie. Just there were these images in my head of people in black robes with white skin and eyes no matter their race. Well, that and Charlton Heston's body, dead in a fountain full of blood. Once I finally figured out what I had seen had been the Omega Man, I immediately set out to watch it once again. And when I did, I wasn't disappointed. I had the very same feelings I had all those years ago, and I couldn't get the imagery out of my mind. So what is the Omega Man about? 2 years after much of humankind was destroyed in a global war with biological weapons, Dr. Robert Neville leads a solitary existence in Los Angeles. These humans that do remain are completely pigmentless creatures that roam the night, destroying what remnants that may exist of the previous civilization. Neville, who had worked on an antidote to the virus, is one of their main targets. By day, he searches for their nests while they sleep. He comes across a small band of survivors that consist of mostly children, but it also has 2 adults. Having injected himself with the experimental serum several years before, Neville very well be the only person carrying the immunities to the virus and be able to reverse the creature's condition. The only question is whether he can survive their constant attacks long enough to be able to prove it. Now, what things convey the level of loneliness for Robert Neville that differs from Vincent Price's portrayal of Robert Neville? Well, the biggest one is that in the Omega Man you have this solitary man who has no one to do anything with. There's no more TV broadcasts, no more radio broadcasts. The only thing he has are books, which no new books are being written, and films that he can go see at theaters, but again, no new films are being made. And then playing games with himself, which is really shown expertly in the film by having Charlton Heston play a game of chess with a bust of Julius Caesar. And Neville has taken it upon himself to preserve the art of the civilization that is now gone. So he has taken priceless paintings and sculptures out of museums around Los Angeles and put them in his home. And so he's left with ghosts, not actual ghosts, but the ghosts of art and music. And that really kind of hits home after a while. So some trivia about the movie. Richard Matheson said that the Omega Man, 1971, was so far removed from the book that he had written, I Am Legend, that it didn't even bother him. The production company wanted a locale that looked like an abandoned metropolitan area, but it cost too much to build one. Just so happened the producer drove through downtown Los Angeles one weekend and discovered that there were no shoppers, so the majority of the film's exteriors were shot there on weekends. When Charlton Heston read the original novel in an airplane coming back to Los Angeles, he was interested in making a modern adaptation of the book, but he had no idea it had already been made into a film just a few years before as The Last Man on Earth, 1964, starring Vincent Price. The writers came up with the idea to make Neville's love interest a black American woman, even though interracial relationships were still considered controversial in the 1970s. The writers figured that in a world where humanity had become extinct, the few survivors would no longer worry about such things. Rosalind Cash was uneasy before her love scene with Charlton Heston, saying, "It feels strange to screw Moses." In the movie, the plague is the result of germ warfare because of a border war between Russia and China. Well, China and Russia did have some serious border issues in 1969, and people were afraid that these communist superpowers were going to devolve into all-out war. The facade used for Neville's fortress/home still stays relatively unchanged on Warner Brothers Ranch Park Boulevard in Burbank, California. The television newscaster reporting about the spreading of the disease in Neville's flashback is Matthias before getting infected and becoming the leader of the family. Early in the film, Neville sees a calendar dated March 1975, then remarks that the local cinema is offering Woodstock 1970 for the third straight year. This indicates that the Omega Man 1971 is set in 1977. Neville himself mentions August 1977 while recording his audio diary. Charlton Heston had approached Orson Welles to direct the film. At one point, Charlton Heston has to ride a motorcycle in the film, but he'd never ridden one before, so he had to learn before the film shot that scene. British studio Hammer Films had previously contemplated a film adaptation of Richard Matheson's book under the title The Night Creatures. The script had been written by Matheson himself, but the project was ultimately deemed too graphic and foundered and then eventually died. The script for the Omega Man contains a scene where Lisa visits her parents' grave, and whilst there she spots a female mutant burying a dead infant mutant in the crypt and lets her live. The scene was cut from the final film, but the screen credit for Woman in Cemetery Crypt remains. And finally, the final shot of Charlton Heston dead in the fountain is often considered reminiscent of Christ on the cross. Heston stated in his autobiography that this was completely unintentional, but the filmmakers decided it had such a poignant meaning that they left it in the film. So, while there was never actually an official novelization of the film The Omega Man, they did release Matheson's novel with the title of the film as a tie-in with cover indicating the characters in The Omega Man. However, there was, I guess you could say, a short story-ish realization. I'm making up a word here because I'm not exactly sure what you would call this, because it's not a novel, it's not a novelette, it's much shorter than that. Sort of a summary / short story adapting the script into a prose form for a magazine. And that magazine was Screen Stories, and the edition was October 1971. What is interesting is that it includes the lost scene that was eliminated from the film, which means that the person writing the novelization actually was working from the script and not from the film itself. So that's a little bit of an extra interesting thing of Omega Man lore. You can find scans of the story online. You just search for Omega Man novelization and it'll come up. And I'll put the link below also for anyone to be able to find it, because it's actually really interesting and just kind of a neat little addition to the whole Omega Man thing. So I hope you enjoyed this little foray into the Omega Man. It is, without a doubt, one of my favorite horror films of the 1970s. And if you haven't seen it, definitely go ahead and check it out. I think you'd get a kick out of it, especially given some of the themes that are present in today's world. So until next time, have fun and enjoy the darkness.